Freed, the jailed journalist flying home after 400 days behind bars in Egypt. Peter Grester is heading to Australia, but his two colleagues remain in prison tonight. Also on the programme, the father of the Jordanian pilot held by IS pleads for his son not to be forgotten. Frustration for Murray as he loses the Australian Open final again. And friends for life, the woman who helped raise money for a pensioner she had never met before.
This is ITV News with James Mates.
Good evening. One of the three Al Jazeera journalists imprisoned in Egypt for allegedly aiding terrorists has been freed tonight. Peter Grester is in Cyprus, the first stop on his way home to his native Australia after 400 days in custody. Our Middle East correspondent Geraint Vincent has the latest.
We begin with breaking news out of Egypt.
For 13 months, the TV news network Al Jazeera has campaigned for the release of its journalists. Today, it had some good news. Peter Grester was found guilty in Cairo last year of charges he described as absurd. But now he's out of jail and on his way home.
These protesters are making it very clear just how determined they are.
And for the first time in a long time this afternoon, he called the office.
He sounded elated. He sounded just thrilled. You could just hear it from his voice. He was so happy. And I couldn't believe it. I rushed into the newsroom, rushed and found my managing director and my news director. And I said, I've got Peter on the phone. He's leaving.
Peter Grester and his two colleagues, Mohammed Fahmy and Baher Mohammed, were arrested in police raids while they were working in the Egyptian capital in December 2013. They were sentenced to between 7 and 10 years in prison for spreading false news and assisting a terrorist organisation. The Egyptian authorities accuse Al Jazeera of being a mouthpiece for the Muslim Brotherhood, the movement which governed Egypt until the man who is now the president, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, overthrew that government a few months before Grester and his team were arrested.
The prosecutors did not present a single piece of evidence.
The three men said they were just doing their jobs, reporting on what was happening in Egypt, and their case provoked international outrage. While Peter Grester has been sent home by presidential decree, Mohammed Fahmy, seen here on the left, is a Canadian citizen who's expected to be deported in the coming days. But the man on the right, Baher Mohammed, is an Egyptian national, and no one knows what's next for him.
We're worried that Baher Mohammed may be left to rot in jail and that the international spotlight will sweep off on Egypt and away to other things and he'll be forgotten about. Baher Mohammed must not be a forgotten prisoner. It's time for Egypt to end the ordeal of all of these men once and for all.
But for all those who joined the campaign for his freedom, justice has only been partly done. Geraint Vincent, ITV News.
The father of a Jordanian pilot being held by Islamic State has urged his government to push forward with a proposed prisoner exchange to get his son back. It comes just 24 hours after a video emerged revealing that a second Japanese hostage had been killed by the militants. Duncan Golostani reports.
Their fates were apparently tied to one another, but Kenji Goto has been killed while there is no word on Muath al-Kasasbeh. For the young pilot's supporters in Jordan, the wait is unbearable. Deadlines imposed by Islamic State have come and gone. Now there is silence. His father once again appealed to militants for his son's release. He also called on his government to do more. The Jordanians say they are still willing to release this woman, Sajida al-Rashawi, a failed suicide bomber on death row. Islamic State originally demanded she be exchanged in return for the two hostages. If anyone knows the fear being felt by the pilot's family, it is this woman. Kenji Goto's mother made public appeals for her son's life to be spared. Now she is mourning him. She said Goto had always hoped to make the world a better place through his reporting. His wife said she was devastated by the news of his death. In Japan, there have been vigils for the journalist and around the world condemnation at his killing.
This is a generational struggle against this ideology, and we are going to have to fight these battles not just in the Middle East but in other parts of the world as well. There is nowhere that is safe from this challenge.
Jordanians are feeling the intensity of that challenge. With Goto's murder, they and the world have been reminded yet again Islamic State does not make empty threats. Duncan Golostani, ITV News.
The Education Secretary Nicky Morgan has suggested the Conservatives will ring-fence the schools budget in England if the party wins the next general election. She also said children will be required to know their times tables and basic grammar by the age of 11. Labour called that a gimmick. And the new Greek finance minister has begun a tour of European capitals in Paris, seeking support for a new deal to replace the country's current bailout. He'll be in London tomorrow. The Shadow Business Secretary has hit back at criticism from the boss of the High Street chemist Boots, who had claimed that if elected, Labour's economic policies would be catastrophic. Chaka Umuna said the billionaire businessman didn't even live in Britain. And our political correspondent Libby Vina is in Westminster. Libby, Labour clearly not prepared to take this sort of criticism lying down.
Yes, the boss of Boots putting the boot in, if you'll pardon the pun, and his comments in particular suggesting that if Ed Miliband got anywhere near number 10, it would be a catastrophe for Britain. Well, that hasn't gone down well at all. This afternoon, Chukra Amuna, the Shadow Business Secretary, hitting back, suggesting that people would draw their own conclusions from comments from a man who didn't even live in Britain and didn't pay taxes here. In fact, he lives in Monaco and is of Italian origin. Now, this all plays into the idea of Labour standing up to big business, but I think some people will question whether it was wise to get drawn into a fight in an election year with such an important high street chain in a dispute that is inevitably going to be characterised perhaps as toothbrushes at dawn.
Thanks, Libby. Sport now, and Andy Murray admits he lost focus in today's final of the Australian Open, handing victory to world number one Novak Djokovic. It was the fourth time Murray had made the final in Melbourne, but it ended in his fourth defeat. James Gibson was watching.
So near once again for Andy Murray, a fourth Melbourne final and a fourth defeat. A third to this man, Novak Djokovic, now a five-time Australian Open champion. The first set was everything you'd expect from two of the world's best. 72 minutes of energy-sapping tennis and an eventual tie-break won by Djokovic, with the first signs that Murray may be about to lose his cool.
Carnby's just missed it.
But he kept his focus in set two, which was another epic 80 minutes this time to level the match.
A set all.
Set three was where it all went wrong for Murray. There was this outburst towards his coaching team. So unhelpful, he said, and it certainly was. Murray lost his temper. He lost the set, and just half an hour later, the match too. He never won another game, losing the fourth set, 6-love.
Fantastic.
Definitely got distracted in the third set, and then in the fourth set, look, he was going for everything, and there's not much you can do in that situation.
One lucky tennis fan left Melbourne with more than they'd hoped. The champion's winning racket. For Andy Murray, its second prize yet again. James Gibson, ITV News.
Rangers and Celtic revived their old rivalry today in the first Old Firm derby for almost 3 years. Rangers' well-documented financial problems that have seen the club relegated to the lower leagues were all forgotten ahead of the League Cup semi-final. From Hampden Park, Debbie Edward reports.
For Rangers fans, it felt good to be back. 3 years they've waited to face their rivals again. The League Cup semi-final against Celtic, giving rise to a return of the Old Firm.
Boys bust! The prize, a place in the League Cup final.
But a lot has happened since these two sides last ran out together, and it wasn't long before Celtic showed who has become the dominant force.
That's not bad. That's Griffiths!
Lee Griffiths scoring for the Scottish champions inside 10 minutes. Chris Commons followed up with a second before half-time. His 20-yard strike too good for the Rangers keeper. But this was far from the fiery occasion of old. This crunching tackle from Celtic captain Scott Brown causing the only flare-up in the game's dying minutes. The Celtic manager was clearly delighted with an Old Firm victory and the bragging rights that go with it.
Off the pitch it was the same old rivalry, but on the pitch Celtic showed the gulf that now exists between the two sides. If Rangers are to return to the top flight of Scottish football next season, they've got a lot of catching up to do. Debbie Edwards, ITV News, Hampden Park.
Finally, when a vulnerable pensioner from Gateshead was hurt in an attempted robbery, a young beautician decided she had to help. But no one predicted that the £500 she'd hoped to raise would soar to more than £250,000. Sejal Karia reports on the tears that were shed today.
An embrace for the kind stranger who helped raise more than £250,000 for this frail pensioner after he was mugged. It was an emotional meeting as he, Alan Barnes, met her, Katie Cutler, for the first time today to say thank you.
It's really not enough, thank you, but it's the only thing I can think of. It's just absolutely amazing. I'm just overwhelmed with it.
Moved by his plight, Katie's target had been to raise £500, but her online campaign went viral, with donations coming in from thousands of people all over the world.
I think it's going to take a few days for it to really sink in, but I'm over the moon. I can't believe it.
Mr. Barnes, who's partially sighted, was attacked outside his home in Gateshead a week ago by a man trying to mug him.
I had me wheelie bin, I was pulling it round the path, and I was nearly to my front gate, and all of a sudden this dark shadow came onto my side, and he said, hand it over your money. And I said I haven't got any, and he sort of pushed us to the ground.
He broke his collarbone when he fell and is now staying with his sister, too frightened to return. Alan hopes to buy a new home with the money that's been raised, but he and Katie have also gained something far more valuable.
Katie, friends for life.
Yeah, definitely.
Sejal Karia, ITV News.
That is all for tonight. The weather forecast is next, but from all of us on the weekend team, good night.
As the cold weather continues, stay in touch and stay ahead of it all tomorrow with Good Morning Britain from 6.
Another beautiful day.
Crizal UV protective lenses sponsors the ITV National Weather for all the people that are out in it.
Where did I put it?
Hello to you again. A very good evening. Well, no let up in the coming few days. The cold goes on. Freezing, frosty, icy nights with sunshine as well as some sleet and snow by day. In the next few hours, temperatures taking a tumble. Freezing, frosty and icy. Lows to -8, maybe down to -10 in rural Scotland, and into tomorrow. Well, clear, crisp, but terribly cold first thing with the frost and the ice. Dazzling winter sunshine before the cloud gathers, and like today, a few showers draped around edges of Britain and Northern Ireland. Sleet and snow across northern Scotland. Elsewhere, mostly rain, but a slushy mix here and there. And again, temperatures very much on the stingy side. A bitterly cold day out there, but we lose that cutting wind chill at last. I'll see you again soon.
Crizal UV protective lenses sponsors the ITV National Weather.